The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, Conflict Resolution Skills for Managers and Supervisors, Getting Teams and Employees to Get Along, presented by our sponsor, Heffernan. We're so happy you can join us. My name is Amanda Ramatar, and I will be your moderator today and be monitoring questions you may have during this session. Before we open up the session, let's review a couple key items. All of the webinar materials we discuss can be found at the URL currently showing on your screen. I will be sharing this URL in a follow-up email, so don't feel like you need to write it down right now. If you have trouble with your internet connection during the webinar, we recommend leaving the presentation and logging back in. We do not control the audio. Your devices control the audio. So if you have audio difficulties, try adjusting the volume settings on your device. If a telephone line goes dead during the call, hang up and call back again to the same number. If all lines go dead, watch the on-screen chat box for an alternative call-in number. Feel free to ask questions or provide feedback by using the chat box or questions box during the webinar. If you are using a tablet, you may need to tap on the screen for the options bar to appear, then you can select the appropriate option. We may not respond immediately, but we will work your questions or feedback into the presentation. If we can't get to your comment or question during the session, we will be online afterward to respond, or we may follow up in an email if we run completely out of time. You may also email us at moderator@aspenrmg.com for up to 48 hours after the webinar. This will be a 1-hour presentation. Questions and comments are very much encouraged throughout, and the presenters will be answering questions at the end. And lastly, we have a number of webinars covering a variety of topics, including those listed at the Heffernan webinar website. In addition, we offer the mandatory Preventing Harassment training in English 3 times a year. With that, let's begin today's webinar, Conflict Resolution Skills for Managers and Supervisors, Getting Teams and Employees to Get Along. Dr. Steve Albrecht is a trainer, author, and consultant specializing in complex HR issues and security concerns. He holds a doctorate in business administration, an MA in security management, a BS in psychology, and a BA in English. He is board certified in HR, security management, employee coaching, and threat management. He has written 24 books on business service, leadership, security, and criminal justice subjects. Thank you for being with us today, Dr. Albrecht.
Thanks, Amanda. Good morning, everybody, and thanks for your time and attention. Thanks to the good folks at Heffernan Insurance and also Aspen Risk Management Group, especially Steve Thompson and Phaedra Buxton over there. Always take care of me and provide a good platform for our conversations today. Coming to you from Springfield, Missouri, where there's a little bit of fall snap in the air, which is great. Looking forward to the fall season, soup and sweater time out here. My work in conflict resolution really started in a couple ways. One is my constant calls and need for coaching services with my clients. Typically, I work a lot with government and public entities, some private sector as well, but mostly government entities. So a lot of coaching about 2 employees not getting along. Oftentimes the issues would be connected to their being in the same room, too close to each other, no privacy, and not being able to get along. And by the end of some span of time, weeks, months, or years, could just hated each other. The other thing is that sometimes teams would come together with conflict where they would be counterproductive with each other. Couldn't get along in projects, couldn't get along in cross-functional activities and things they were trying to do together. And the last part of my work in conflict resolution came from my starting off in 1992 with my work in workplace violence prevention and helping especially employees under tremendous stress as potential perpetrators of workplace violence, trying to lower the emotional temperature, get them connected to mental health services and other things like that that would be useful for safety of everybody at work. So that's my background in this area. And a lot of the things that we're talking about as a manager or supervisor are going to come with my built-in discussion about the need for coaching, and conflict resolution can be really addressed best as a coaching skills process for you, where you come in and you're meeting with employees. I will talk to you and show you a model that I have used successfully in getting 2 employees to at least get along together in the time and space that they're working with each other. I often say to employees, and you know this as well, you don't have to love or like everybody you work with, but you got to coexist. Our clients, our customers, our taxpayers expect coexistence. No one cares about the fact that we don't get along outside the business. The people that receive our services, they just care about their own needs, their own desires for the products or services that we offer them. So it would be useful in terms of morale and how people continue to stay with the business and retention issues with employees if we got along. And conflict is expensive, and conflict drives good people into leaving the organization when they say, I don't want to work in a place where I don't feel comfortable, I don't feel safe, I don't feel connected, I don't feel praised, valued, listened to. I'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide. When you look at our material today, the slides that you have access to, if you want to print out those ones that could serve as a reminder to the things we're talking about would be great. I oftentimes do that in the webinars I go to, which is to print out certain slides and keep them in a file folder marked with the webinar title. And I just look at them occasionally to remind myself in conversation and staff meetings, discussions, and training things that what I want to pull out from the discussion that I saw somebody create in their own webinar. So thanks for your time and attention, everybody, and let's get rolling. So I often think about ways that teams and individual employees feel disconnected from the workspace and feel disconnected from their bosses, disconnected from their coworkers, disconnected from the work that they're doing. And so if you look at the left-hand side of the pyramid here, it's not feeling valued, listened to, heard, understood, feeling a sense of hostility between other people. It could be connected to things we'll talk about like harassment or bullying. Bullying is a difficult concept to define accurately. We seem to have trouble in organizations and seem to have trouble in the business world identifying. We can identify bullying, but can't come up with a specific definition. I always say, we'll get to our conversation about bullying in just a minute, but I always say to organizations, especially HR people that I talk to, let's look at the schools as the model for bullying and anti-bullying programs. Let's take the definitions of what bullying looks like in the school environment and alter it to fit the adult environment in the workplace. That's not happened yet, and bullying is not illegal in all 50 states, unlike sexual or racial harassment, which is, of course. We don't have a good definition for bullying, and that concerns me. Then you look at the right-hand side of the pyramid and you say, okay, how do teams and individual employees feel connected, listened to, appreciated, understood, valued, heard? And one of the sort of overarching themes of feeling heard and listened to and appreciated is praise. And I talk with a lot of supervisors about how praise shifts the attitude, the morale, the sense of connection, the empowerment to employees by catching them doing good things and reminding them of when they do good things. And so I believe in my experience that there is a disconnect between how much praise supervisors and managers give to employees versus how much they think they do. And so when I talk to bosses and I say, how often do you give your employees praise? How often is it a formal thing? How often does it happen in front of larger groups of people? How often does it happen in public meetings? How often does it happen in front of a larger staff discussion? And they say, oh, all the time. And then I talk to employees and I say, how much praise do you get from your supervisors and managers? And they go, sometimes they say you didn't screw up nearly as much as you usually do. Well, we don't oftentimes hear it as much as we'd like. And I think there's a disconnect there between what managers and supervisors believe in terms of how much praise they give versus how much they actually do. And I think that is a step in the right direction for you to say, part of my role is not to be a cheerleader, but to catch people doing good things on our behalf and to remind them how important it is and how we value it here and how it makes our connection with our employees stronger by saying we appreciate what you do. And it's not just because we pay you to be here. That's not why people come to work. When we do employee satisfaction surveys of employees as to why they get out of bed and roll into work, or these days roll across the bedroom over to the work from home computer that they have, it's about feeling connected. It's about feeling valued. It's about feeling like they're making a contribution to the success of the enterprise. When I look at public sector organizations, many people that I work with in public sector actually live in their communities and live in those cities where they work and feel a strong connection to the parks and to the programs and to the elected officials and the things that they're trying to do on behalf of their own city where they work there as well. Lots of people that work in private sector organizations feel strongly committed to the things that they're doing, the products, and services they provide to their customers and clients. And the idea of feeling valued and appreciated by their organization is one reason we have higher retention and people stick around. And the idea also that conflict between teams interferes with the success of the business in ways that are sometimes really easy to measure. We screwed this up and it didn't go well and we lost business. This conflict between two employees leaked out to the customer, the taxpayer, the client, and we lost business as a result. So conflict is expensive and it's bad for business. The last thing at the bottom there is the concept of ground rules. We'll talk about ground rules in 4 unique categories here today. Excuse me, especially in ways that organizations and teams need to get along. And ground rules are really ways to say to individual employees and to the group, the team at large, is this is the way we function, and ground rules give us a process and a path to get to where we want to go. One of the reasons we focus on ground rules in these 4 areas I'll talk about is to empower employees to be in charge of our success, and to empower employees to create ground rules, and I'll give you the path to do that, so that they understand how they are important to new employees coming in, to our onboarding process, and to a part of our culture. So the 4 ground rule areas that I always look at for team success is, how do we function in meetings? What is our meeting behavior? What is our staff meeting, safety meeting, tailgate talk, whatever it happens to be, formal or informal meeting behavior? What is it? What are the ground rules? Like show up on time, don't interrupt, follow the agenda, contribute to the agenda. Those types of things are very concrete ground rules for meetings. Second category, excuse me, of ground rules is how we communicate employee to employee, face-to-face, over the phone, via email, text, however we happen to do it. What is our ground rules set for communicating with each other, not with bosses, but with each other, peer-to-peer, across the work that we do? Third one, what is our expectation of our boss? What expectations do we have about our boss? He or she will keep us informed about what? He or she will provide us opportunities about what? He or she will provide us praise in the work that we do. And then the fourth one is, what is the expectations of the supervisor, the manager or the supervisor, with his or her team? What are the ground rules that you have to follow as an employee? Show up on time, do your work, keep your promises, things like that. So I'll get into a very specific discussion about ground rules, and I encourage you to think about how you apply this process to the teams that you manage, and to especially look at teams that are a little bit dysfunctional or highly dysfunctional, and say, we need to have a ground rules meeting. A ground rules meeting is very specific and say, what do we need to keep doing with each other? What do we need to stop doing for each other? And what should we start doing, because it's a good idea, in these 4 areas: meeting behavior, employee to employee communication, boss's expectations of employees, and employees' expectation of boss. So let me get back to my praise discussion here a little bit. And I look at praise as kind of a volume knob, things that we can turn up or down. And sometimes, and I worked for city government in San Diego for 15 years, and I would see people get praised for stuff I did every day. And there was a disconnect there. It's like, how does that happen? I do this stuff all the time, and yet this person got a citation or a day off or whatever happens. So it has to be balanced. It has to be appropriate for the work that is done. And sometimes we say, well, okay, you're doing your job, great, terrific, that's what we expect. And other times, for those people that have gone over and above and gone to the extra mile and really demonstrated their expertise, their experience, their connection, their commitment, their patience with our clients, customers, and taxpayers, is when we catch them and give them praise. So really the watchwords, the phrases, the 3 S's, the 3 P's: soon, sincere, specific. We don't wait 2 years to catch people doing the right thing. We tell them after we see it. Walking down the hallway after a meeting, hey, I want to bring up, I really appreciated your contribution during the discussion. You gave some good ideas we didn't think about. Thanks for that. Sincere, that you're empathic and you're sincere in your praise with somebody. Specific, not just good job, but hey, good job with that client situation. Good job taking care of that taxpayer thing. Appreciate you handling other departmental issues so it didn't turn into a problem. Positive, we look for the good. Personal, not just thanks, but hey, it matters to me as a supervisor. It matters to us as an organization. And then proactive means we go out looking for ways to catch people doing the right thing. And we go out looking for ways to catch people doing things on our behalf that we can give them praise. And so I look at this again as a volume knob. What's the appropriate volume that you have this in your organization for specific team members and specific employees and for the group at large? And here's the last thing. I think sometimes some employees sort of believe, because of how our culture is oriented around bosses and managers and supervisors calling the shots, that they are the ones that can give praise, but we can't praise each other. Well, that's ridiculous. Of course we can. We can praise each other based on the things that we do for each other as part of our work. So we give praise to our coworkers. Hey, thanks for that. Appreciate that. Thanks for getting this thing off my to-do list and taking care of it. Those types of things are opportunities that build team strength and build cohesion between employees. So I always like to say in training that it's not your mom and dad's workforce anymore, right? We're a different collection of diverse people who bring their personalities, their orientations, their beliefs, their opinions, their tolerances, their generational differences and similarities to the workplace. Think about your parents and your grandparents. The clothing they wore at work was probably similar to everybody else's, right? My dad was an aerospace engineer in the 70s. We came out to San Diego because he was a rocket scientist making drones take pictures of the Russians. And my dad worked for an aerospace firm. He had a crew cut and black glasses and a white short sleeve shirt and a black tie with a little red stripe on it and a pocket protector with slide rules and pens and stuff in it, just like all the other engineers that worked at his organization. Think about how we have evolved to this point where we respect everybody's contribution and we don't care about so much the color of your hair and whether you dyed it purple and how you decorate your office, as long as it's reasonable and not offensive and appropriate, because we want to bring a wider view, a wider collection of viewpoints into the organization. I teach diversity a lot, and I look at the contributions people make from their creativity as to the potential solutions that we're looking for as one of the primary drivers of diversity in organizations. So one of the concepts that comes up in the diversity conversation and should come up in the concept is protected classes. And in California, we have a lot of protected classes, more than anybody else in the United States, I think. And domestic violence is a victim is a protected class in California. Hair is a protected class in California. So you look at these issues here that say, okay, these are the characteristics that people bring to the organization that they cannot be discriminated against as a result of having these. And so sexual orientation and marital status and age over 40 and things like that. Primary traits are things that we were born with. Secondary traits are things we acquired. Pregnancy, veteran status, things like that are secondary traits. Skin color, gender are primary traits. Most people have been discriminated in this country since the dawn of time to the passage of the Civil Rights Act in 1964 mostly for primary traits, gender and skin color being the most primary. So the reason protected classes is an interesting concept is that almost everybody listening to me is in a protected class somewhere. I'm in several, probably so are you, which means everybody has the same sense of being in a protected class to take care of each other, to not allow for harassment, discrimination, or retaliation as part of the work product is a key component of being a leader today. The other issue about protected classes, it leads us to a conversation about age. And I think one of the issues where I see the most conflict, and when I come into organizations, I expect it's going to be about something and it's about something else. And oftentimes where I'm most surprised is the reason that the organization has team members that aren't getting along, or groups of people that aren't getting along, or individual employees that aren't getting along with supervisors or each other is age. And oftentimes we look at the strata that you see here on the screen, Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z most often, and say, are people most likely to be birds of a feather and flock together? And are people most likely to look down on another generation that does not share their values, their approach, how they do their work? Oftentimes I see conflict between generations where, especially older employees, I'm in the baby boom generation, for example, they look down on other employees as not being hardworking or perceiving that they only look for the next killer app and they're always overly fascinated with technology as opposed to hard work. Then I look at younger generations, especially look at Generation Z, which is the employees that are in their 20, 21, 22 range now, coming into the workforce, that don't understand how we don't embrace technology and artificial intelligence and software that makes things faster and more efficient and better and easier. So I think it's easy to look at these four strata here and find yourself trapped in one of them and say, well, I tend to see the ocean through my little particular drinking straw when it comes to my generation. Birds of a feather flock together, and we tend to hang out with people plus or minus 5 years our own age. I see this myself, the people I hang out with are plus or minus 5 years my own age. My best friend, if some of you watch CBS News, my best friend is Major Garrett, a San Diego guy. He and I have been best friends for 50 years. And I'm 58. I've known that guy since I was 8 years old. When I look at the people I hang out with, and you do the same thing, you tend to say, well, why is that? We tend to share the same values, the pop culture reference, political beliefs, things like that, because we grew up during a time span where it is easy to make reference to certain things that were iconic in our world. If you talk to the average 15-year-old now who has an iPhone or another cell phone, he or she does not understand that the world did not exist prior to cell phones. You talk to people that were not born when 9/11 happened. They don't understand that it is a driver for a lot of the people in other generations as they look at sort of the iconic, historical events, tragedies in our world. So what this means to me is the need for patience. What this means to me is the need for empathy, the need for better listening skills. And we don't always have great listening skills, and we are distracted by our phones and the paperwork on our desk and our laptops and tablets and desktops and things like that, and we are not great listeners. And so I think one of the ways of connecting these generations in a more smooth and efficient and effective way is to be a better listener, and to not leap to conclusions about these other generations without having conversations with people about your expectations and what they are, and trying to find some middle ground. So when you look at, and I'm saying this is kind of a prescriptive conversation, if you look at yourself and you say, if I'm in conflict with other people at work, is it because of a different age? And sometimes it is. The concept of protected class is really important to me because I hear a phrase, especially with angry team members, especially with coworkers that are angry with each other, which they toss around a lot, and oftentimes it is incorrect, which is hostile work environment. I'm not a lawyer, but I see lots of examples where people use the hostile work environment to talk about a bad boss or a coworker they don't get along with, or some sense of conflict that is created that has nothing to do with being in a protected class. And if you look at the first characteristic, treatment based on being in a protected class is the primary characteristic of a, quote, hostile work environment. If we don't have that, we don't have a hostile work environment. I ask employees, and I think as a supervisor, I'm asking you to do this as well. Use your language and your words specifically, and you say, if it is not connected to being in a protected class, then use something else other than a hostile work environment. Say, hard to get along with, not my favorite boss, whatever it happens to be, but stop using hostile work environment to define conversations, interactions with coworkers or bosses that don't go well. It's not the right phrase. It's not the right word. It has to be discriminatory, has to interfere with the employee's ability to do their job successfully. It has to be pervasive, meaning more than one time. It has to be severe, retaliatory, not stopped by management. Hurt feelings, rude people, bad or assertive bosses don't meet the legal definition of hostile work environment. I hear people say, my boss is a jerk, and I say, why? And they say, well, she asked me to come to work on time and do my job. That's not a hostile work environment. That's just being a boss. So we look at how employees don't get along at work, and some of the issues are what we call RATS problems, relationships, how they get along with each other, authority, how they get along with bosses, transition, how they deal with change. And some employees are not great with dealing with change. And some of them are service issues, how they not only serve our outside customers, but more importantly, how they fail to serve our internal customers. I talk a lot about customer service in my trainings, and we talk about the internal relationships are just as important as the outward-facing external relationships. External clients, customers, taxpayers, people we collect money from and pay our bills and keep us employed are certainly critical. You know what they say, if business is what if you don't have, you go out of, right? But the internal service relationships between each other, between departments, between teams, between team members is just as critical. Think about natural enemies in organizations. Finance doesn't get along with the people that say, why are we always having all these purchase order rules and you always kick my paperwork back, blah, blah, blah. And sometimes the legal department is seen as a compliance business, and they're always in the business of telling people no. CEO's office or city manager's office is sometimes perceived as being in the no business. We don't put forth things, we turn them away. So think of collisions sometimes between departments just that are sometimes natural enemies. Then we look at the C's, competency. Can you do the job? Character. Can we trust you with the goodies? I think about a young firefighter who's 22 years old, comes out of the fire academy. We give this guy a 22-year-old guy a $1.2 million fire truck to drive at 60 miles an hour through our city streets. That's a character issue. Can we trust this person to be able to do this job? Do they have the ethics and the competency to do this? And can they fit into our team chemistry? And can they fit into our overall work culture? The culture at your bank may be different than the culture at the grocery store. The culture at the factory may be different than the culture at the internet marketing firm, right? Everybody has a different culture, and sometimes people fit into those cultures, and sometimes they collide with what's happening in those cultures. So we look at relationship, authority, transition, and service problems as things that need to be coached and paid attention to. We look at competency, character, chemistry, and culture issues as how do we choose and select the right people that will fit into our work culture and stay there and thrive for as long as they want to be there. So I look at a couple of things here. These are the 5 things that bosses typically have to address. Violation of policy and procedure. You cannot smoke in the dynamite factory, right? Work performance, quality of work, deadlines met, things like that. Attitude of service to not only the external customer, but the internal ones as well. Attendance, right? Got to show up on time, manage your breaks and lunches, and do that correctly. And then avoiding conflict. Some of the biggest things we're talking about here is not being in conflict with each other, not being in conflict with other departments, not being in conflict with our customers. And all these things, and if you go to the right side of the screen here, think about this phrase, and I kind of always file this away, is what is the impact on the business? If someone's not there as an attendance issue, it's a business impact issue, right? If somebody is consistently late with the quality and the quality of their work is not good, those are business impact issues. I always say to managers and supervisors, focus on those things that impact the business in a negative way the most. And sometimes you have to prioritize those. In a coaching conversation, we do prioritize what we talk to people about. The most important things get the first conversation. And then the last one there, think about this. Do you use, or can you use, or should you use a BIP, a behavior improvement plan, as opposed to a PIP? Those of you who've been around a while and think about HR stuff, oftentimes think about the PIP, the performance improvement plan, is based on the person's performance, the work quality, their deadlines, work performance, things like that. But maybe they need a BIP, which is a behavior improvement plan, which looks at their service attitude, that their attendance, or their conflict issues. So oftentimes I will hear supervisors say this person needs to be written up and given a performance improvement plan, and what they're really talking about is their behavior. You can divide coaching into two categories. One is, do we focus on the employee's work performance, what they do? And the other is, do we focus on their work behavior, how they do their things around other people in our work culture? Sometimes a PIP is useful, and other times it needs to be a BIP. So make sure that you focus on what the right solution is. Is it a behavior improvement plan, which you can do through coaching, or a written document, or a performance improvement plan? And there's a big difference between the two. So look where people have conflict at work. They typically see the work as boring or repetitive, or it's misdirected, meaning that they're given the wrong instructions on how to do things. The work is not very imaginative. They feel very rote. It feels same old Groundhog Day. It feels repetitive to the degree that oftentimes it has high human contact and a transactional nature, and it gets boring after a while. Clashes with team members or supervisors. Stress from home that crosses to work, and stress from work that crosses to home creates conflict for people, and tension and anxiety. Employees who can't or don't like change, or can't cope with change, especially if you work in a fast-moving organization where the culture is on the gas pedal a lot. Cynicism, disillusionment, burnout, great names for a punk rock band, right? Burnout, for me, tends to be a long-time employee has stopped feeling motivated. A long-time employee has stopped feeling praised. A long-time employee feels tapped out. A long-time employee doesn't feel like he or she can contribute to the organization, so they sort of check out. Again, that's a coaching issue. Harassment, bullying, we'll talk about. Gossip, we'll talk about. Office politics, bad manners. And then there's a concept called social intelligence. My dad, that's Carl with a K, wrote a book called Social Intelligence. And he defined the phrase social intelligence maybe in the way that you do. There's lots of ways to define it, but he said, read the room and say or do the right thing based on who's in the room. It's not just being nice to people. Everybody can do that. But it's reading the room and saying or doing the right thing based on who's in the room. If you're in the room with your bosses and clients, it's different than if you're in the room with somebody who's one of your best friends at work, right? And sometimes people misunderstand how to apply the concept of social intelligence, and they say, well, I can say or do whatever I want because I've been around a long time, or I'm older, or I've been here a long time, or I've been in this industry for a long time. Not necessarily. I remind employees all the time, especially in the coaching conversation, and you can do this too, that there are two pedals that they operate at life. One is the gas pedal and the other is the brake. These days, in the year of our Lord 2021, we should have our foot hovering near the brake pedal, which says just because you can say or do something doesn't mean you should. You hurt people's feelings, you hurt relationships, you shouldn't say or do certain things because you have read the room and said, you know what, this is a brake pedal discussion here, where I'm not going to contribute and ruin my reputation or put my job at risk. Or it's a gas pedal conversation where I have no issues and no concerns, and I'll say what I want to say to the person who I have good boundaries with. If you don't have good boundaries with somebody and you don't know what those boundaries are, I always encourage employees step on the brakes. So we look at coworker conflicts. We have different friends coming from different neighborhoods, cities, the food you eat, the background, your culture, the languages you speak. Some employees are perceived as hard workers or not. Some employees used to socialize together off work and now had some sort of falling out. That happens a lot, and now don't. There's an us versus them mentality, which I talked about in some departments, which there's a sense of conflict there. Drama kings and drama queens. These are people that the dog always ate their homework. There's always traffic. The baby's always sick. There's some reason they can't show up and do their full capacity of work. And then the last one is gossip. One of the measures I do when I do live training programs with groups, especially teams, is to say, okay, think about gossip as a concept in your organization. On a 1 to 10 scale, if 10 being all we do is gossip all the time and 1 or 2, we never do it, where are you? And some people shout out 9 and some people shout out 2. And I get a sense of the work culture, especially between teams, if people feel like there's lots of gossip going on. So let's talk about the negative power of gossip and how it impacts the business in a negative way. So I'll certainly admit that gossip is fun and that it passes the time, and sometimes it's true. So-and-so is sleeping with so-and-so. And so when we look at issues around gossip, a lot of times people use it as sort of a time waster, and also because it's fun to sort of talk badly about other people, especially if you don't like them. But can we also admit that gossip wastes time and that it creates cliques and it creates a silent treatment, and it really ruins friendships, relationships, and in some cases marriages, because it's about a violation of trust, especially when you tell somebody something and they pass it all around. I see gossip in organizations as impacting in a negative way the departments and teams and the way we communicate. It creates huge issues about trust. It damages your personal reputation if that's how people see you. Number 9 there, it makes people feel attacked, bullied, and talked about, and has huge consequences, gossip, especially in workplaces, besides just people feeling miserable or quitting their jobs. It can ruin the culture. It can ruin the reputation of an organization. I look at gossip in the social media world, and I'm always really saddened and disappointed when I see some 13-year-old girl or some 14-year-old transgender kid or somebody else who's committed suicide as a result of being hounded and gossiped about over social media in their school or some other situation like that. It's just awful. So when I look at gossip, I say this is a coaching issue, and you say as a supervisor, look, your function is to do your job, not talk about other people. I've heard specific examples or have seen you do this, and I want you to stop it. This is a behavior I want you to stop because it impacts the business in a negative way. I think you can coach people around the concept of gossip to say, this is not what we hired you for. Stick to your business, stick to your professional activities here. Don't talk about other people in the organization, especially in this hurtful way. And I'm telling you as a supervisor and in this coaching discussion, this is what we expect. My function in organizations oftentimes is to drive the number from 10 down to 2. And many times I see in organizations where somebody will say, especially a male supervisor, I refuse to have a meeting with a female employee unless the door's open. And I'm like, really? Why? Well, because people talk here. And I go, then the culture is broken where you are. I refuse to have a meeting with a female employee unless there's another witness in the room. And I say, why? And they go, well, because people talk. And I go, then the culture where you are is broken. You should be able to have confidential closed door meetings with anybody of either sex, no matter what the issues are, and not have people come by and go, what are they doing in there? The answer should be having a business meeting, and the person should say, oh, and walk away. But some departments, some teams have so much gossip built in that the smallest thing turns into a big thing based on how they perceive it. I think we have to coach that issue away as best as we can. So let's talk about conflict. 2 employees work it out, rise above their differences, move on with each other. Second possibility, 2 employees agree to disagree. You have your beliefs, I have mine. You have your approach. Here's one way I do things different than yours. We can get past it, move on, and get along. Third possibility is then we start to have issues. The employees say that they're going to get along, but don't really get along. And they continue to hold grudges, and sometimes we get silent treatment, and it shows up in big or little ways. Fourth one, one employee gives in, lets the other employee win, and the conflict continues because they're furious that either management didn't address it or they were unable to work it out with the other person. One or both employees transferred, quit, or gets fired. I don't know how that S got on the end there. I'm gonna have to fire myself. I'm the one that created these slides. And we have either the problem has ended in the worst case scenario with one or both employees leaving, or one employee leaves and the other thinks that they won. It's a lot, not what we want. So let's talk about how we address it. So I'm going to give you a prescriptive equation for managing two employee beliefs that they can't get along and never will get along. I've got a prescription for that we'll talk about. Abusive conduct or bullying. In California, where I came from, we talk about the concept of abusive conduct, and it is a statutory language that was created by the legislators in California to I think address the concept of bullying, but they didn't do it in a very specific, well-defined way. The second one there, horrible, willful, malicious, intentional conduct that fails the reasonable employee, supervisor, or employer test. That is the California definition of abusive conduct. My friend Catherine Mattis, that's Catherine with a C, Mattice, has written a really cool book about employee bullying. If you're so concerned on that issue, get her book. It's very prescriptive. She talks about creating a psychological power imbalance so the employee feels one down, embarrassed, humiliated, driven to tears, belittled in front of others by either coworkers or bosses or a team of coworkers or a boss who allows that stuff. Hazing, taunting, pranks, sabotage of work or personal property is the worst case scenario for bullying. And then the more subtle forms we see there is setting employees up to fail, piling on work, negative performance evaluations, not allowing them to succeed in other ways like getting overtime or hammering them in performance evaluations and other passive aggressive stuff like that. So my concern when we look at bullying as a workplace issue is it's not well defined. And I think we can all know it when we see it. And it's sort of like one of those things where we go, yeah, that's what it is, but we don't have a great definition for it. And in this country, I'm concerned that we don't have a specific set of HR guidelines. And I belong to SHRM, one of the biggest HR associations on the planet. We have conversations about it, but we don't have a really good definition of what bullying is. It's bad for business. People leave, creates turnover. It's a bad reputation for our organization and the community. There are higher costs, litigation costs, liability costs, insurance costs. Look at that fourth point there. The bullies run the workplaces. Even the bosses are afraid. I've seen that in work cultures as well. As they go, well, until this person retires, we're sort of, walking around on eggshells because that's the way he or she is. That's the wrong way to go. A lack of management vigilance, a lack of management courage, a lack of an immediate and effective response by managers and supervisors, department heads. No consequences for the bullies, no support for bullying victims. Bad way to go. One of the issues I think has to be addressed in bullying definition is the same thing about hostile work environment, which is, do we see an assertive boss as being perceived as being a bully? And which is case usually a one employee or two employees feel that, but the rest of them do not. Then we have a perception issue, which has to be addressed by coaching them as well and say, what are your expectations? Because we don't think this is a bullying situation. Let's look at your expectations of how you are treated by this boss, and let's make some adjustments in your perception or in how this boss manages you. So think about this concept in your organization. Do we see it? Is it a small thing? Is it a big thing? Is it non-existent? Is it overarching? Where does this concept of bullying fit into your work culture? And is it a result of team not getting along, employees not getting along as well? So a couple books for you, for your bookshelf. One is Crucial Conversations. I'm a big fan of these guys. Carrie Patterson, Joe Grenny, Ron McMillan, Al Switzer wrote this book back in the day. I think there's a second edition that came out as well a few years later. They defined a crucial conversation as having high stakes, strong emotions, and different opinions as to what to do. And there's a really cool video on YouTube that's done by Ron McMillan. He's kind of a gray-haired guy, a little bit heavy set. He's got a dark suit on and a green dress shirt. When you find that video, it's about 14 and a half minutes. I like that one a lot. I think it's a live studio audience video, and I think he really captures what their research and discussion said. And what those guys said in the book was most of our business conversations and life conversations, we do well. 80% of them routine, normal, and casual, and then 20% we screw up. And the reason we screw those up is we don't realize that they're crucial to the other person, or they become crucial to us during the conversation. High stakes, strong emotions, different opinions. What they said is you just landed, if those three things exist, you just landed in a crucial conversation. What they talk about in the video and also in the book is what are our remedies and our approaches and our tools for our toolkit that are different for those 20% conversations rather than the 80% ones that we do find. So I recommend the book. Second book in my book list is George Thompson's Verbal Judo. And Thompson wrote this book back in the day. He passed away many years ago. He was an interesting guy, big guy. His nickname was the Rhino. He was a college professor in Tampa, Florida, and he had this concept of verbal judo, which he taught around the world. If you go to verbaljudoinstitute.com, they still exist, and I've worked with those guys, and they teach the verbal judo concept to healthcare and law enforcement and public service and private sector organizations, especially dealing with difficult taxpayers, customers, clients over the phone, face-to-face in the field. Thompson was a big acronym guy, and one of his acronyms was LEAPS. Listen actively. And I already talked about how we don't do a great job of listening in our country. We're distracted by our screens and other things that we're holding in our hand that are not focused on the person who's a boss or a coworker or a client or a customer that we're talking to. Better listening skills. Empathy. I see, I understand, you could be right. Thanks for telling me. I'm sorry that happened. Let's figure out what to do. Let me take some notes. Those are empathy building statements. Calm down, as Thompson said, is the worst thing you can say to somebody who's not calm. You need to calm down, Larry, right? What calm down says to another person is, you don't have the right, in my opinion, to be angry. You don't have the right, in my opinion, to express your anger on this situation. That's what saying calm down to somebody says. And when we say it to somebody, it doesn't make the situation better, does it? Ever. And when someone says it to us, it just makes us instantly furious. Stop saying calm down. Use empathy building statements. I see, I understand. Tell me more. Sorry that happened. Let me jot it down. Apologizing, it doesn't mean we're at fault. It doesn't mean we caused the problem. It just says it checks a box for this person's head that we apologize for the situation. Ask questions. Designed to get more information. Tell me more about what happened. Who'd you talk to yesterday? Okay, what was the result of that conversation? What did you think after that conversation was over? Ask questions that are open-ended, extractive, to get more information from the person. This calms them down while they explain what's going on as they go from louder down to quiet, and also gives you more information. If you ask a lot of yes, no, closed-ended questions, you get a lot of yes, no answers. Well, did you talk to him? Did you speak to her? Instead of saying, well, when you spoke to her, what did she say? Flip it around from closed-ended to open-ended questions. Paraphrasing suggests we were paying attention and we've done it correctly. It really builds rapport and empathy with the other person. Go, yeah, you heard me. And that's what paraphrasing is good. So if I understand you had a problem with Mary yesterday, and I think what you were talking about was this, this, and this, am I correct? And they know, yes, you were paying attention. Your listening skills were what they wanted. Last one, seek solutions. And one of my best seeking solutions activities as a boss is to walk and talk. Let's head over here. Let's head outside. Let's walk down to the break room. Let's go over here. Let's walk and talk. Why? Because we're out of the boss employee, little chair for the employee, big chair for the boss, big desk for the boss sort of modality. And we're talking as neutral people walking side by side. People tend to, especially males, tend to do their best conversations walking side by side because it's neutral territory. Think of those conversations with people where you felt he got in my face or she got in my face or I got in her face or space. That face-to-face, chest-to-chest, toe-to-toe, confrontive battling modality is not a great way to go. Side by side, walking and talking, what we call corridor coaching, walking down the hallway, tends to work pretty well. Give that a try. So I like things that are memorable, things that I can remember especially under stress. And I use the 3 C's, communicate, clarify, and commit. These are coaching discussions here. Communicate the issue to the employee, clarify, using paraphrasing questions to make sure this person understands. But really the most important one, and you can probably already get this yourself, is the commit piece. The commitment piece, especially in coaching, is not just they're nodding their head going, I'll be better, but you're getting a commitment to action, a commitment to change, to start doing the things that you both have agreed upon are important to do. And I think here's the problem. We do really well in the communicate part. We can clarify it so you can see it from outer space. We screw up the commit part because A, we want to end the meeting, or B, the employee wants to end the meeting. So he or she will say, yes, I promise I'll be better. And then they leave and you go, I'm a genius. And I'm the best coach in the world. And then what we figured out was they just said that because they want to get out of the room. They want to end the meeting. So I use something that Glenn Kramer taught me. Kramer is a really good attorney. He's a labor law attorney that works only for organizations in California. And he is a charismatic speaker and a guy that I really like his explanation of HR stuff in a very simple and direct way. What he says is in the commitment statement, say to the employee, before I turn you loose, before we end this conversation, is there anything that you need to tell me that would prevent you from making the changes we talked about? Is there any obstacles, anything in the way, anything you can think of that would prevent you from making these changes we just discussed starting right now? And this is a great way to do it. In fact, ending your conversations by writing down your question and their answer can go back to solidifying what you said they agreed upon when they talk about it and go, well, this thing came up, and you go, I gave you a conversational opportunity 2 weeks ago and you didn't bring this up at all. Again, especially if you're at a crossroads between discipline and coaching, and you're having that last coaching conversation before it switches to discipline, the commit question, is there anything that you need to tell me? Are there any obstacles in the way? Is there anything that will prevent you from doing the things we talked about? Is a powerful way to support your position to move from coaching to discipline by saying, what we've talked about has not worked, and what we have talked about, you've not been able to make the changes. I'm going to switch over to a new mode. So I like the commitment statement that Kramer talks about. Think about that for your closing, you're wrapping up your coaching conversations. Okay, let's talk about how we work with employees. Employee one and employee two aren't getting along. Meet with employee one first and say, what is it that drives you crazy about employee number two? What is it that he or she does that makes your job more difficult? And in your perfect world, magic wand territory, if you could touch this situation with a magic wand, what would you want employee two to do differently around you? How you communicate, how you function, how they take over certain things for you, how they should take over certain things, the quality of work that you want, whatever it happens to be. Okay, gather that list from employee one as to what they want from employee two. Second, meeting with employee two alone. Ask them, him or her, what employee one does to make it hard to get along and what drives them crazy and what they would like employee one to do differently. You may see some similarities in both lists. You've got a list of employee one's complaints about employee two and employee two's complaints about employee one. Meet again with employee one and start talking about this concept of ground rules. Ground rules is, what do you want to employee two to do around you or not do around you? It could be behavioral things. It could be performance things. What do you want this person to do or not do around you? Okay, then go back and meet with employee two and say, okay, I've got some suggestions, some ground rules from employee one. Let me hear what yours are. And you can foreshadow these in the first meeting. Tell me what you want employee one to do differently around you, and what are the ground rules, the hard and fast ways that you want employee one to be different around you? Behavior, conversation, space, touching, hugging, whatever it happens to be, language they use. Okay, then you can go back to employee number one or employee number two and reveal the ground rules as they have been really tightened up and kind of solidified, or you can have a final meeting with employee one and number two. The final meeting with employee one and number two together is facilitated by you, but it is not a meeting where they agree to comply to the ground rules that they have created with your help to you. They have to do it to each other. This meeting can be stressful. This meeting can create tears and shouting. You have to facilitate this carefully and professionally and say, guess what? No shouting, no tears, you can't storm away. And also, the critical piece is they must talk about the ground rules with each other, not you. So you sit them so they look face to face, and you sit off to the side, not so that they sit and stare at you and talk about the ground rules. Say, okay, employee one, tell employee two, with politeness, with respect, what ground rules you'd like that person to follow. Employee two, tell this person with politeness, with respect, what ground rules you would like this person to follow. And agree to facilitate that meeting to the point where we can come to a conclusion where both sides are not necessarily thrilled, but can coexist, can get along in a time and space together. Now, if the rapport or connection or the problems are so historically great with employee one and number two, and you say it's probably not going to be useful to get them together in the same room, even with me there, I'll just say, okay, here's the ground rules, go forth and do your work. Okay, I will monitor the situation about how you interact with each other, but having a meeting face-to-face between number one and number two is not going to be productive. I'm not going to do it. So you have to read that relationship and say, it will, even of my best attempts, it's going to end up in tears or screaming. I'm not going to have it, right? I'll just say to employee one and number two, here are the ground rules that we both agreed upon, follow up in an email. These are the ground rules in terms of behavior and performance and interaction with each other. This is what I expect you to do. Okay. So oftentimes I will go into an organization, I'll ask these 6 questions here. See what happens, you're an English major, you can't count. What do you like about your job? What don't you like about your job? What do your coworkers do that makes your job easier? What's the opposite obvious question? What do your coworkers do that makes your job more difficult or wish they would not do? Last 2, what does your boss do that makes your job easier or better? What would you wish your boss would stop doing? If I went around to all the people that worked on your team and I had an individual 20-minute, 30-minute conversation by themselves off the record where I'm not answering they're using their answers with their name, connecting the two, would I have a pretty good feel for the strength or health of the work culture asking these 6 questions? The answer is yes. If I came in and asked 10 people these 6 questions over a span of a half hour each interview, and it was anonymous, and they knew they could trust my my connection to them, not saying where it came from, but just the answer itself, I'd get a pretty good feel for how things are. Would we agree? So I think this is a decent set of coaching questions you can ask. And I would say, especially if you're coming in as a manager or supervisor to a new team or a new department where there's some history of conflict, you can come in and do sort of the, I'm confused. Could you tell me about these answers here to give me more sense of what I need to do? And you can get a lot of information here in a short period of time. Okay, so we talked about the 4 key areas plus an extra one here of ground rules. One is staff meeting behaviors and outcomes. What ground rules, and you can get this from the group as a group exercise, what ground rules do we need for staff meetings? Show up on time, follow an agenda, stop looking at your phone, don't interrupt, don't be an idea killer. Second one, what do we value as employee to employee communications as ground rules? Answer your emails within 24 hours. Don't walk away when I'm talking to you. Stop looking at your phone, right? 3, bosses' expectations of employees. Show up on time, keep your promises, do quality work, bring me problems as soon as you can so I can address them. 4th one, employees' expectations of bosses. Give us information about promotion opportunities. Keep us informed about things relating to our department, our team, or our organization. Last one, we could also do a service best practices for our customers, clients, or vendors. But again, usually I focus on the top 4. Staff meeting behavior, employee-to-employee communications, bosses' expectations of employees, employees' expectations of bosses. If you run a meeting with these 4 or 5 ground rules collections in as your goal, you're going to get a set of operating principles. One of my clients is the Navy. I do this for these guys that work in this warehouse in San Diego about every couple of years. And I'm always flattered that I come back the next time they put the ground rules up as a poster. And it makes me happy because I think this is how we teach new people, how we do part of the onboarding, how we do kind of new employee orientation. These are the ground rules, the values that we have about these 4 key categories. And we like them so much, we agree to them, we value them so much that we made a poster out of them. You don't have to do that in your organization, but the ground rules exist to solidify and make more concrete the behaviors, not abstract things like we need to get along better or we need to respect each other. Those are too abstract. Ground rules are more specific, concrete actions that employees can do and new employees can learn to do to fit into the team in a cohesive way. Oh, let me jump ahead here. Okay. Last couple things before we wrap up. One of the successful cultural values of successful teams, in my opinion, is their ability to give each other direct, non-personal, immediate feedback. Think of that second category, that second bullet point here, where people drive each other crazy for little things. That's a cubicle door up there. I took that picture in New York. It's not a restroom door, it's a cubicle door. People put cubicle doors up to say, leave me alone, let me do my job. Successful people, I tell groups and teams, successful organizations have the courage and ability and skill to give each other direct, non-personal, immediate feedback. Now, let's start at the beginning. Direct means you and me. Don't run to mom and dad unless you need to go to HR or another supervisor. Handle this between 2 adults working in a professional environment. Second, non-personal. Stick to business. Don't pick on me about what I look like or any other characteristics. Stick to the business impact issue. Third, immediate. You know, when 2 years ago you parked in my parking space, I never forgave you, right? That doesn't work. And the last one, most powerful part of this model, direct, non-personal, immediate feedback, is the concept of feedback, which is different than criticism. I, in talking to bosses and coaches, outlaw the use of the word criticism. We don't use criticism, we use feedback. Hey, let me give you a little feedback. Whenever somebody says to you in your life, hey, can I give you a little constructive criticism? Don't you automatically get defensive? I do, right? I'm a trainer. I look at feedback sheets, not criticism sheets, right? Feedback, my favorite F word, all right, my second favorite F word, free is my favorite F word, maybe food. Feedback is a much semantically preferred word than criticism. It says, let's talk like adults. Let's talk like human beings. Not, let me give you some criticism that you're automatically going to be defensive about. Direct, you and me, non-personal, stick to business, immediate, right now, feedback. Walking down the hallway, heading out to lunch, going to another meeting, sitting cubicle to cubicle, talk about stuff. Could I ask you to do more of this or less of that so we don't drive each other crazy? These are things that can be talked about in this model of direct, non-personal, immediate feedback. Why don't people do it? Because they're afraid. Why don't people do it? Because they feel like this person's not going to talk with them. Why don't people do it? Because they feel like they're going to be turned down or the person's going to argue with them. What I have found in my experience is when we choose this model, direct, non-personal, immediate feedback for little things, could you do more of this or less of that? Could I ask you to take your phone calls, 20 feet away from my desk? The person goes, oh, okay. and they do it, and then they ask the other person to do something, and there's compliance there, we start to build trust. We start to build a kind of give and take where we go, you do this for me, I'll do this for you, and it creates a better team environment. Think about your use of the word feedback in your coaching discussions, in your performance evaluations, in your conversations with employees. That is the preferred phrase, feedback, not criticism. A couple things, and then we'll wrap up here. I got a couple metaphors here on this slide. One is the metaphor of coexisting. Get along in the time and space together. Don't have to love or like each other, but as a matter of policy, as a matter of our culture, as a matter of HR function, we are going to coexist and get along in the time and space together. Taxpayers, customers, clients, vendors, they expect it. Second, personal motto, is what I'm about to do or say going to be okay with the other person, then do it or say it. But there's a little caveat to add in there. Is what I'm about to do or say going to be okay with the other person and my organization? Your friend loves it when you smack her on the rear end and go, have a great weekend, I'll see you Monday. May not be the best thing to do in front of a client or a vendor. If it's okay with the other person and okay with the organization, say it or do it. If not, step on the brakes. Speaking of stepping on the brakes, the third metaphor there is the idea of the traffic light. Red light behavior, too late. Going to get a ticket from HR, including maybe the loss of your job. Yellow light behavior, time to step on the brakes and maybe get some coaching from a supervisor. Green light behavior, we're getting along fine. Supervisors, our function is to keep people in green light behavior. Our function is to coach when people get into yellow light behavior. Last couple things here. First bite of the apple, something I stole from my EEO friends. It is a way for employees to give each other direct, non-personal immediate feedback and set better boundaries and say, please stop doing this around me, or do something different around me of a personal nature or a cultural nature or a interactive, less interaction, or talk to me a certain way differently. And I will give you this first opportunity, the first bite of the apple, to be successful, so I don't have to go to the supervisor and have them force you to do it. It is a concept where we self-manage our behavior with each other. And if it doesn't work, you have the right to go to a supervisor and or HR and say, this hasn't worked, because I want to teach my supervisors to say the first thing in most non-harassment, non-bullying, non-sexual racial harassment issues is to say, have you talked to the person? No, I want you to go do that. And I would be, as a supervisor, say, let's create some ground rules. You go back and say to this person, this is what I need. Give them the opportunity to correct. That's the first bite of the apple. Last couple things. Good teams ask questions. Good teams use direct, non-personal, immediate feedback, not criticism. Good teams keep their promises. They don't say, I'll have that for you Friday and don't have it for you Friday. Good teams are accountable and responsible for their promises and their behaviors, and they monitor their behavior to be within guidelines and also to be appropriate around each person. Good social intelligence. Good teams deal with conflicts between each other, or good supervisors get involved in employee A and employee B, employee 1 and 2, conflict resolution discussions before they get out of hand. Good teams share best practices with each other. It's not who is right, but what is right. And also that there are more than one right answer. There's more than one right answer to how we do things at work. And last one, good teams function with accurate urgency. We do things quickly, but accurately. We do things with precision, but we do them fast enough to value our coworkers' times or value the time, the special time of our taxpayers, customers, or our clients. Last one. We treat each other like ladies and gentlemen in the workplace. We create boundaries. We have the first bite of the apple concept, and we practice good social intelligence. We use the concept of direct, non-personal, immediate feedback. We get help from other peer supervisors or HR or our legal department for advice, and we want employees to know and understand and follow and respect our policies as to how we get along better in the workplace. Amanda, back over for you for any questions as we look at our wrap-up time here. Matt, back over to you for any questions.
Thank you. So we actually don't have any specific questions. So we are all set to go. I just want to thank everybody for attending today's webinar presented by Heffernan. We will send information by email with instructions on how to access a copy of the presentation on our website. Thank you, Dr. Steve Albrecht, for your time and expertise today. We hope all of the attendees found today's webinar to be a valuable use of your time. Please be sure to join us on January 11th for remote work policies and considerations. Thank you and have a safe day, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.